All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being here for the latest Coffee with the Mayor. People are still getting their sweets and coffee, and please feel free to get up and get more if you want. Today, we have Brian Escona. He is an employee with the city of Olivet. He currently serves as a horticulturist for the Olivet Park and Recreations Department within the city. In his role, he's responsible for leading the Weed Warriors Initiative and overseeing the Habitat Restoration Project. Prior, Brian worked in the field of social work, incorporating visits to parks as part of the mental health services for those that he provided and care to his clients. He's a strong advocate for the therapeutic benefits that well-maintained green spaces can foster, and has a background in both sociology and psychology. Brian has volunteered with Forest Park Forever, thank you very much, and the Shun Natural Reserve. He's also the primary manager of his family's 32-acre tree farm that's in the state of Louisiana. In his free time, he is currently working on restoring pine flatwoods and bottomland hardwoods forest. He has a passion for nature. I have no green thumbs. He has all the green thumbs. And at this point in time, it's my understanding that Brian will also be providing a PowerPoint as he begins to talk about the habitat restoration process in our area. So Brian, welcome. It's good to see you.
Hey, everybody, thank you for coming. And I am the horticulturalist here. I started in 2020, March, right when the lockdown started. So the nature of the work has changed since then. And that, you know, I work with others now. So I'll get into this presentation here. We'll see if I can.
That over.
It'll probably come in the way. So when we're talking about restoration or habitat restoration, you know, at least there's an implied notion that you're returning to something, which isn't exactly the case here. Our parks have like geographic and plant inheritance, mainly in the form of the old trees. So essentially trying to improve the habitat around these collection of old trees that we have and plant new trees to expand those areas. So the goal is to, you know, improve the habitat quality, making it to where it can support more life. And just ecological health in terms of, you know, being able to manage runoff, you know, providing those like clean air functions, and whatnot. So there is, compared to like a native garden, like a habitat restoration, you know, it has kind of a model that it's striving for. It's not just a bunch of pretty natives. You know, so we're going for the, you know, Missouri ecosystems in the St. Louis region. So that's going to be, we have tallgrass prairie and oak hickory forest. And, you know, and we also have, you know, riparian forest, kind of bottomland areas that aren't just oak and hickory. So those are sort of the targets. Loose targets, you know, and we do have native gardens, and I think it helps to distinguish like a habitat area from a garden. It's less formal, you know, often it doesn't have an edge. There's going to be more diversity, there's going to be more mixing of different plant species. So this is actually a garden in this picture. This is the garden over by the pond at Stacy Park. And, you know, you have big clumps of the same species. Sometimes you get that in a restoration project, but not necessarily. And they're more chaotic. And more plants are coming from seed rather than being planted as quartz. So I was gonna talk about the process today, and this is not, if you look at like the Society of Ecological Restoration, this is not identical to their process. This is our process, okay? Any, like a formal, let's say the Department of Conservation is doing an ecological restoration. There's gonna be a lot of resources, time dedicated to the planning process. You know, ours is more ad hoc, it's more action oriented. You can spend a lot of time and certainly a lot of money working on these plans that are never implemented. So, so we have, so there's no planning phase here. The planning is sort of done in the site selection. You know, finding these like potential sites. Now, a lot of sites in parks are kind of contested. They have different users or people have different ideas of what to what they should be. Maybe it should be a pickleball court, you know, or maybe it should be an Oak Hickory Forest. So there's so when I'm picking out a site, I want to find an area that's really not being used for much anything. So that we don't get started, you know, and then suddenly a path is coming through there or something like that. So I did have initially, you know, I had to communicate with like our design team for all the improvements that we've had to make sure, because I had some sites that actually are the greenway are going right through, you know. We hadn't actually started work, but that was sort of my vision. So finding the right site, you know, has to have some sort of potential for growth. And I like rapid growth. You know, I want results like
No
the next
steep creep
year,
leap, huh?
you know?
No.
At least some results. A lot of work goes into the site preparation, and I'll talk about these different aspects of site preparation. You know, the invasive removal is a big one. But then we also have to sort of remove the debris and leaf removal if we're seeding. And that's important because that affects the seed germination, but also affects how many weeds you'll get. You know, and then planting and seeding, and sometimes more planting, following seeding, and sometimes more seeding. So also, one thing we're doing is, you know, we're making structures. Habitats are not just plants; they're physical components that go with it, non-living components, and I'll talk about that. And then, you know, monitoring and maintenance. You know, I'll talk about all these individually, but a lot of that is watering. And just identifying new problems that come up. Sometimes that could be with park users, or sometimes it might be with returning invasives. And I'm getting better at this last one, which is trying to involve volunteers throughout the process. And this last year, I think we had more volunteer participation than ever, which might explain why I feel less run down than I have from a lot of the other years that I've been here. All right. Oh, and this is our pond, and that's our turtle, Franklin. There's also a lot of bullfrogs there, you know, and goldfish, which to my knowledge are not native species, but that's okay. People like them. So I just want to make sure you guys know the parks I'm talking about. You know, we're up here, Five Oaks, which is in Grandview, or I'm sorry, which is in Morrison Park. And we'll look at each park and I'll point out the specific areas. And then Stacy Park. So these are our two biggest parks. There might be potential up for Indian Meadows now, especially since we've connected with the Greenway. But those are the only two. And here on the left side, we have Stacy Park. So at some point, it might be nice, you know, to have like blow up maps of these areas, but that's kind of beyond my skill set. But maybe somebody here,
That's
could,
done.
do that. So Stacy, a lot of the work is, this is what I call like the pond vicinity in this presentation. The pond's right here. And that whole area gets a lot of attention. Down here in the Cottonwood Trail. So that's, woodlands, forest. That gets a lot of attention. At Warson, moving over to Warson, we have this path area here. Which is, started out as a garden, and then I realized this is taking too much work. I cannot possibly weed all this. So now it's going more to just a habitat area. And then this is the Sassafras Trail. Which I'll be talking about. And then we have an area over here that a lot of people don't know about, but it does, we have seen it, and it does have it's got a lot of, and a lot of trees that eventually will be really nice. That picture's just, okay, invasive removals. This guy's probably just gonna be in the whole time. Well, we just, we remove invasives in all of our parks. But in places like Villa or Irvside, it's not really part of a restoration project. We're just trying to get them out of the parks. But in Stacy and Warson, it does fit in to, the restoration work. And so that's how we kind of select where. I mean, there's more honeysuckle than, we have the capacity to remove. So we have to like target spots that will add value afterwards rather than just getting rid of their invasives. So along the the Sassafras Trail, that's where a lot of work has gone. Weed Warriors has met there a few times. And also along the eastern side of a lot of Weed Warriors and staff done a lot of work over there. And Cottonwood, or at Stacy Park, it's on the Cottonwood Trail and it's in that pond vicinity. There were also a lot of invasives in the tallgrass prairie, and Weed Warriors removed that and as well. So what invasives do we have problems with? Well, most people know honeysuckle, right? The bush, the red berries, that seems like it was really widely planted in all of that at one time. It's sort of, that's kind of our public enemy one. It's not like that way all over the state. Some parts of the states, it's privet or it's another, but there's generally a shrubby, aggressive shrubby invasive, or it could be burning bush. But we also have a vine, winter creeper or creeping euonymus, really glossy, dark green leaves, that actually can take down full-size trees when it really gets going. But also just covers the floor, just covers the ground. And then we have white mulberry trees. There's some white mulberry trees, that's an Asian mulberry that we have in the parks that are old and nice, but where's these weedy white mulberries, which are kind of just crappy trees, they start rotting. And so sometimes we have to remove full-size trees in this work. And that's primarily, staff does that. But we're also removing smaller ones too. And Weed Warriors will do that. Trees that are, just a couple inches thick. They're all sizes. White mulberry is found in all sizes. And while I like the berry, we still have to. So those are the big three invasives. And this work also requires some kind of control of the really weedy natives. So grapevine is an issue everywhere that we're pulling off and trying to control. Pokeweed is the one with the really dark, looks like blueberries. And a few of those are nice, but when you have all pokeweed, you can't even, it's extremely hard to kill. And it's hard to dig out. I mean, it's like a cluster of 3 potatoes that is, down in there. So once it and it just fills the soil with the seed. So once it really gets established, it's a pain. White snake root, that's it's kind of a nice little weedy native. You'll see it growing all around Stacey Park. But we have to get rid of it in order to establish new stuff. So we just leave it growing around the park. It's a good pollinator plant. It looks nice, but if you're trying to do something different, you generally have to get rid of that. And it's a perennial, it kind of looks like an annual, but it's actually a perennial, so it comes back. Okay, so after we remove the invasives, generally we come in and we start doing some planting the woodies, shrubs, and trees. And I'll talk about forest relief in a minute. But we've gotten trees from the Department of Conservation, and we purchased trees from Forest Relief, Forest Healing, which is a great nursery. It's pretty affordable, and they specialize in native trees. So when we're planting, we'll root the invasives. We also build out into the turf a little bit. It's part of the master plan, is kind of reducing turf area so as to reduce mowing. And so we're kind of doing both. We'll remove the invasives and then we'll go out a little bit into the turf. Especially turf that's not like a soccer field, just turf that's not being used. And so we're doing things, like with little experiments in the planting that we've done this year, which is the invasives can come back real vigorously. And so now we're using like cardboard to give our trees a little zone to control competition. Because as those weeds start to return, you can end up hurting your tree trying to control them. You can end up cutting it with a weed eater, and in all sorts of ways. So this is so far it seems like a really successful method. Reduces spraying and cutting, and sort of protects the tree. So there are plenty of challenges in terms of planting woodies and these native areas. Probably weed competition is probably the biggest one. There's accidental damage that occurs in parks more so than at somebody's house, maybe because of all the users. I think myself included, and every assistant I've ever worked with has killed a tree, unintentionally. It's sort of like your rite of passage. Syria. Like watering is also a big challenge. We have a big tank, see me driving around with it on the back of the truck, because there's nowhere to hook up a hose in these spots. And sometimes you don't have to water it, these really tiny plants, but those have a real low survival rate. And deer. And so when you see cages on a tree, that's all about deer. Sometimes it's about the mowers too. But deer will eat it and they'll rub on it. And, they've killed a fair amount of trees, or they'll just do damage. And we sort of know the trees that they really like. So pawpaws and plums seem to be deer favorites as far as eating. And they like pines as far as like rubbing goes. But they like other stuff too. So Forest Relief, I want to give a shout out to them, because we've gotten hundreds of trees from them, and they're free for us. They're free for their mission is to, build the urban forest. And so if you're doing your own project on a public land, you can get a tree from them. So we've gotten hundreds this year. We felt special because we were the first order. So these were pictures that they took. They wanted us for their website. And I also learned that when you are your first order, you get better quality. So I'm definitely gonna remember that. Because it was definitely the best order. I mean, I think I've got at least a half dozen, maybe like 8 orders through them. You know, generally I do 2 a year. One sort of planned, the other sort of spontaneous at the end of the year. And it's Creve Lake. They have a little arboretum there. It's just a great nonprofit who has provided, you know, us with a lot of resources. Um, so let's see next. Oh, yeah, as far as planting this year, often we'll do some planting with volunteers. And this organization was a planting shade, was a group of Ladue High School students, whose mission is just to plant trees. And they actually approached us. You know, we had a meeting with them. And I sort of told them, you know, I was telling them about how this is part of restoration. This isn't just like planting trees in somebody's backyards, because they do that. And how we were going to be doing it differently than they might have done it. And how, you know, a lot of these things were not going to survive. And we did the cardboard method. And they also, what I don't think they normally do, they helped with the site preparation. You know, they helped get debris out of there. They helped with the invasive removals. And it was just it was a really good group. And it sort of, I've worked with other high school males before, and I've often found them sort of unimpressive. And I've found the girls a lot more impressive than the males. And so this group was led by 3 boys, and it kind of restored my faith in my gender.
So you as well educated and informed them and made them excited about what they're doing.
That was I
Doing it
was
better.
trying to, and I felt like they were real excited for the project.
Good.
And the site looks great. Yeah,
Do you ever do kids? Not that they're helpful, but so they can.
we do, and
With
I
parents?
actually have, I'll talk about little
Okay.
kids later in here. I have a slide on that. Yeah, but not for like the hard labor.
Parents.
So planting perennials, this is my coworker Cody. In these restoration sites, the goal is not to fill it with perennials, but I like to use sort of anchors, you know, put them on the edges. And if we plant a perennial, you will have a flower next year, you know, and you seed, you generally don't get flowers the next year. So we'll often do it on the edges, or, you know, certain strategic sites in this, spots in the site. And for that, we will use some, you know, like nursery stock. Generally extra. We don't generally order a lot of stock for that, or we'll use plugs. But lately we've been doing a lot of transplants. We're taking stuff. So I talked about these native gardens. We're generally taking stuff from the native gardens that's growing too well and putting it in these restoration sites. So the gardens in the habitat areas are, you know, connected in that way. And this year, in the last year, we started getting volunteer plants from residents. I actually tried to organize an event called the Great Divide, but it was the first year. And so we got like 60 plants or so, but we're gonna be doing that next year and try to, you know, make it a little bigger.
Could be another Sleep Creek
Yeah.
leap on you.
Yeah.
There you go, by the 3rd year.
Yeah, so, yeah. And because, you know, residents often have native plants that they do not want, or they're making a change, you know, or it's essentially become a weed. So, that's just a way to get involved people, and to reduce cost. We're all trying to stretch the resources here. So sometimes staff does a lot of planting, volunteers do a lot of planting. And as far as like the challenges here, we do a lot of this transplant work in the fall. You know, and it's not like planting a tree in the fall. If we plant a transplant and water it a few times, like it's gonna be okay the next year. If we did this in the spring, we'd have to water it all the time. So this transplanting work is really done in the fall.
So typically, I often hear when I listen to KMOX and the gardener, is that it's October is typical time of fall, when if your plant is growing beyond your garden and you wanna take part of it out, share, or trimming trees and doing that, it is typically in October, not before. Pretty accurate?
It is accurate. I do some opportunistic transplants. If we have like a wet week where the temperature drops into the 70s in July, I'll often start doing some transplants at that point. I have a little area in our nursery called the infirmary, and that's where we put the transplants. So remove them when it's cool, let them get strong again. But by and large, October is probably the best time, you know. But you can always push it in this field. Seeding. So like, as I said, these habitat areas, most of the perennials, the grasses, the wildflowers are going to be grown from seed. And we, it would cost a fortune to get all these plants to, you know. So we purchase seed, Pure Air Natives and Missouri Wildflower Nursery are the big places that we use. And I do some seed collection. And then we collect a lot of seed. Now we couldn't do this in the beginning, but now we can collect a lot of seed just within our parks and just redistribute it essentially. And so you'll see I store this all in paper bags. And so every fall, you know, there'll just be just a cluster, you know, of brown bags like filled with seed in our shop.
So what is the seed life? How long can a seed live in its brown bag and be something that will eventually grow when you put it in the ground?
The answer to everything in horticulture is it depends on the plant. But most of it's good for it. We'll have a seed life beyond a year for a couple of years. I mean, some will last 20 years, and some really, you know, start to degrade. But everything that's collected in the fall will live for into the spring. And it also depends on how it's stored. The way we store stuff is not intended for long. You know, paper bags would not be the way to store your seed if you wanted to use it 4 years down the road. Sometimes we get seed. Sometimes people donate seed. Gardeners donate seed. I'm always I'm hesitant there. I really have to trust you because, you know, you could always be giving me weed seed and think you're giving me seed. That's good. It is definitely all has to be one type of seed. I used to just mix the seed together, and turns out that's not a good way to do it. You end up getting more weeds. You sort of don't know what you're putting down. So everything's definitely has to be separated by species. Labels are great too. I don't actually label. You can see my labels, but if somebody's giving me seed, I want to label. So we get some seed as well. So seeding is a great way to involve kids. You know, both collecting and sowing. And I just feel like that's something that kids should be doing, working with seed. You know, it's sort of primordial or something, you know, like we've been doing for generations. And it's just a good tactile way for them to be involved with it. So often when we do seed collection with children, we will just go ahead and sow it immediately so that they get to be part of the whole process. So that's along the Warson path, and that's just a spot we put out seed. Sometimes we've had them sort of sow elderberries at one point, so we could just throw it in the spot. throwing berries. Probably the one that I haven't collected with them that I think would be fun would be milkweed. Where they could actually kind of clean it. It would make an absolute mess. But it would be outside and they could sort of clean the seed, put it in a bag. And we have tons of milkweed in the prairie. So maybe some point that might be, a project down the road. Where they're not just collecting it, but they're sort of cleaning it and then sowing.
You always gotta keep thinking about
Yeah.
what's next, and keeping people involved and informed.
Yeah,
Could I just mention that oakweed, when you're cleaning the seed, you have to be careful not to touch your eyes when you're doing it so that you don't have vision problems for the next week.
okay. Well, it's good to know. I did not know that. And but I've never had the vision problems. Let's hope to see, but it is
A kid might rub their eye when
Yeah,
they're working
yeah.
with it. with it.
yeah, okay.
Thank you for that.
The physical structures. Physical structures. So physical structures are often about what biologists call refugia, or just hiding places, essentially, for animals. Be it mammals or insects. And rock walls are a good one for pollinators. And so, we try to aesthetics are always a big challenge with the physical structures because they can look trashy. Yeah.
With your habitat restoration, what are you trying to encourage to move to those areas?
So I mean, just the native wildlife.
Yeah.
So even, where we plant a lot of persimmons and that's gonna be possums and raccoons
Okay,
primarily, maybe some deer. So that might not be something you want in your backyard.
No.
And
but they're there.
they're there, yeah. And and pollinators, the bees and the butterflies are the most visible. That we're actually gonna see, because a lot of the other things are gonna be out there at night. We're not, I'll plant stuff for deer, right? I plant sumac for deer, and that's because they like to rub on that. So they'll stay away from the other stuff. And I'll leave sumac pretty much for the deer. I'm not really trying to encourage, they're just here. So might as well give them something that they can break and it'll be okay. So rocks are a big one. And I'll say it in a second, logs or brush piles and then logs. These are all just things that are on the site. We have lots of little limbs down. And it's not really practical to haul them all off. So often we'll pile them up. You'll see this one has actually a sheet of cardboard down. That's because we've learned that birds like to use these and they'll drop a lot of honeysuckle berries in them. So you'll have a brush pile with honeysuckle growing right through it.
Hmm.
And that's almost worse than having just honeysuckle, so we put down like this weed cloth this time, essentially using cardboard there. And again, like aesthetics, does it look like a pile of trash? Does it look deliberate? We're still figuring all this stuff out. And you can find a how-to on brush piles, but it doesn't tell you how to make it look good, and so we try to pick smart spots where, we did a large brush pile in the middle of the prairie. And which looks pretty nice when the prairie's growing around it. And I mean, we've seen a ton of birds and mammals, and it's definitely a sort of little critter favorite spot. And that, so they do work.
And walking the Cottonwood, I think I saw a bunch of them on the side. You have it in the Cottonwood pathway at
There-
Stacy as well.
There's also just piles that we just haven't removed because it's so deep. in there. That's when we get a Boy Scout project to help just drag stuff out. But there are intentional ones as well.
Brian, so you've got the prairie and you said you have milkweed in there and then you have this habitat and there's mammals. How are you keeping the bunnies from eating it? It's such a problem. I keep planting milkweed and they are destroying it all.
You know, we don't have the bunny problems that, that people have at homes. And the deer are a lot more, kind of selective here than they will be at home. So I mean, we've absolutely lost some plants to bunnies and they like to come into, our little nursery area and eat whatever little babies we have going. But as far as like in the parks, we haven't lost a lot of stuff to bunnies, or they're just nibbling and they're moving on.
So Brian, let me address that historically. I'm 68 years old. And my parents built their home and moved in when I was 4. And I can still remember, Daddy, 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 turn on your bright lights at nighttime so that we could see all the rabbits scattering. So the rabbits have been around in Olivet forever, and it is a difficult, situation, but, I remember seeing the white cottontails and we would ask our parents to turn the lights on so we as kids could enjoy seeing them scatter around. So they've been in this area, in Indian Meadows for
And I should qualify that,
many years.
because occasionally we'll see a perennial, which has some chicken wire around it here, and that. Like I talked about the importance of monitoring, when I start to see the damage, I might put some chicken wire around it, typically just for the first year. I like smooth aster, and that seems to be a bunny favorite, and they're constantly eating that. So, Beverly?
Would you say that some of our lack of bunny damage is because we are encouraging the larger predators in our parks with our snakes and our coyotes and foxes?
I do feel like that,
Repeat the question.
yeah, if the predators help keep the bunnies down, and we do have a lot of hawks and stuff, and the hawks have kind of room to hunt. I suspect that's probably related. It's not as safe for bunnies to be running around the parks as it is maybe somebody's house.
Backyard.
So the other thing, you can see that picture, yeah, you can see it there. Logs and snags, a snag is a standing dead log. They're an important part of, a forest ecosystem. 1 in 10 trees is generally dead in a forest, in a healthy forest. And so sometimes we intentionally leave logs behind. Sometimes we leave logs because they're so big, we couldn't really move it if we really wanted to. But we just try to integrate it, into the habitat. And, actually, they can, I think, if you have like some ferns growing around or something, they can add a nice sort of beautification vector too. Snags, the standing dead trees, they always have something living in it. It's the woodpeckers or whatever, so things are always burrowing in those things, and I don't know if I've seen a snag in our parks that doesn't have something living in it. There's you gotta consider safety. You might cut limbs off of it. Yeah.
Do you do anything, this is all parks, but do you do anything that's like space between homes where nobody really does anything?
I mean, we don't do, well, because we're here, you have to have public access for me to work on it. So I'm not personally involved in anything like that. I do, I've talked to some residents who sound like they're trying to do stuff like that.
Because there's spaces between homes that are big,
Yeah,
that don't have, no one will really do it, there's a ton of
yeah,
invasives and.
yeah. So, and I think there could be a lot of potential there in sort of making wildlife corridors.
Mhm.
But I'm not working on it.
Okay.
That's,
Unfortunately, we're restricted to public land that we have access to. We're not allowed to work on private property.
How am I doing on time? Do I need to speed it up?
It's 25 after, and I don't know how many more slides you got, but
I think.
we got a crowd here, and they're
alright.
interested in what you gotta say.
So, other things as far as structures go, you know, there are things like birdhouses. We have some bat boxes. We haven't really seen any of those attract bats, but the birdhouses definitely do attract birds. Both of these were done as Eagle Scout projects. With Eagle Scout projects are sort of one and dones, you know, they don't really, there's no maintenance aspect. And actually, this is an area where we could use some help as far as like cleaning our birdhouses. Sort of, you know, we check them to see what things are living in them. But we have bluebird, bluebird houses, which have attracted bluebirds, but you know, things change, like they need to be moved because stuff grows up and they have to be, you know, sort of not next to a tree, or they'll get snakes, you know, and so, if anybody's, you know, it'd be great to have a birder who wanted to, participate in our parks, or even tell us what the birds are. That's my bird idea, it's pretty weak. But that's just an example of like a physical structure, that, we're adding to the parks. And every park has some birdhouse. Maybe, I don't know if Zide has a bird, but it does, okay. Signs and communication, you know, sometimes people don't know what's going on in an area. And they, you know, are a little confused. So we do have these, you know, native habitat signs. Or we have I put a sign out in an area where I had to do a lot of spraying. So we are trying to communicate and sort of anticipate, you know, the projects that might generate a lot of questions as far as like what's going on here. It's also, this is like a new thing that we haven't been doing, you know, for the last 20 years or so. And so we have to, you know, we talk to residents in the parks and we put up these signs. So, you know, people are filled in. I don't think we don't really have like a web component or anything like that. Or like a brochure, you know, that'd be something fun to come up with. That's, you know, not for me to come up with, but for somebody else.
Ideas can lead to wonderful things.
So, yeah, so there's definitely room for improvement in our communication. You know, people have ideas on that, that'd be great. I have this thing on maintenance, just like it's huge. You know, these things are like never done. So that, you know, I saw a picture, I think, or maybe it's coming up, but Dave, my assistant, Cody was my assistant, Ed was my assistant, back in the day, and they've all helped with this. There's Tally, who is a college student, so she's not with us now. But she was helping all summer. And this is our kind of, we have a contractor, Melinda Surdane from Compass Landscape, primarily working on the prairie. You know, we just can't get to it. We just have enough. You know, and she brings, and does our basin at Stacey, and brings great expertise. She's always willing to share her knowledge with me, and provide, you know, suggestions for the areas that I'm managing. And so she's been enormously helpful, as are all the assistants. And the maintenance guys at parks also help me frequently to do this maintenance work. If we're cutting a tree, that's gotta involve maintenance most of the time. So maintenance is, you know, the watering, pruning, cutting, and removing additional invasives after the fact. Weather creates a maintenance need, big limbs fall, you know, sometimes they block our trails. The trail maintenance, that's probably Ed right there, who does the trails. I do the plants. They require continuous maintenance. I think maybe at the end we'll mention there's an event. If people want to help with just the trails, replacing the logs, fixing washout, fixing runoff, all sorts of maintenance there. And also there's sort of a maintenance aspect is to maintain a diverse habitat. They tend to homogenize with time, where the aggressive plants are sort of taking over. So adding new plant species or reducing the weedy ones. So in order to try to keep these like diverse habitats, that's a continual maintenance, continual additions for that. So, as I said, we involve volunteers with, wherever we can. The involvement has been growing over time. And some of that's just sort of organically evolving. We're just seeing where people want to help and where they can help and figuring out ways to incorporate. When I first started, I sort of, people wanted to do stuff and I didn't know where I could bring them in. Also, students approach us or Boy Scouts approach us, and they're doing that because they see what we're doing. They're not just, hey, you should start doing some habitat work. They see what's happening and they like it. And a lot of the student groups use these parks, especially Stacy. Warson is probably a park where we could use more volunteers. We're just finding ways to bring them in. It doesn't always work. I have a Boy Scout who wanted to create a prairie. I haven't heard from him, in a long time. We got the area cleared, so now we're kind of taking it over. I knew that was going to happen. When you're working with teenagers, they feel like they can make these long-term commitments. And they don't really know that they can't. Like all the birdhouses that Boy Scout was dedicated. He was going to maintain them for a year, but I don't think I ever heard from him after those things. After he got his Eagle Scout project, his Eagle thing, never heard from him. And that's, we just know what we're working with. I'm not going to let them start something if I don't think that we can finish it. You know what I mean?
Or maintain.
Or maintain it. So, we do have to tell people no, sometimes that's not a good idea. So yeah, always looking for new ways to volunteer. Ed, you guys want to plug the,
We've got it coming, we've got a slide.
oh, I got a slide. This is just like some, stats on, the sort of what we've done. We've definitely planted 2,000 trees. We have like 15 acres. Not all of that is like pristine. It's getting there. But we do sort of monitor or quantify some of this stuff. Is this it?
That's it.
Okay. So there is this is for weed warriors.
Yeah, but you're called for volunteers.
Yeah, I just meant for the maintenance, the trail.
Yeah, I think you're referring to this Sundays.
Oh, the Sundays event, sorry.
That's the immediate. Can you guys wanna,
So Ed, you wanna come on up, if they're gonna ask you that? Ed is an Indian Meadows resident. Ed was a volunteer that created pathways and trails. And eventually the city appreciated his value and he's now an employee with the city. If you wanna come up and address it, let's get you on the camera and
sorry.
I didn't know that. Oh, hello.
Hi, Mike Fellow, Indian Meadows, man. How are you?
So good. So anyway, we do have an event this Sunday. Kate, you can stand up as well. Who basically helped organize this and helped, get some scouts, involved, but we need to re-wood chip the Cottonwood Trail. It's, you know, it's all degraded, obviously. And so that trail serves a real nice, function in that it gets our residents into these areas so they can experience that nature and also become one of our advocates. So having that nice wood chip layer down really is inviting. It looks nice. So we have all the piles. Cody and I yesterday got those in where they need to be. And so this Sunday at 1 o'clock, anybody who wants to join can also join us. Bring a wheelbarrow and a pitchfork if you have one. We have a lot of tools. We're just going to try to mulch the entire path. Yeah, so.
All right,
I think-
all right, very good.
When when we started creating some of these areas, I thought it was just gonna be the, you know, young and old hippies like me who were using these spots. But, because I think we have these really inviting trails that everybody uses them, from small kids to seniors. And most of the users, in fact, are not like me. So that was a pleasant surprise, and a big part of that is keeping it accessible. And Weed Warriors is the other volunteer. That's the, you know, honeysuckle removal. And it's gonna start in November, and it'll start with the Greenway. And as I said, that's sort of a future area for some restoration work. And then Stacy Warson, that's where people show up. And I'd like to, you know, I'd like for the removal to complement this habitat building process. You know, so we're not just doing it around a parking lot or something like that. And so by doing it at Stacy and Warson in the Greenway, it can do that. We meet at 9. I do provide the tools, the loppers. This is primarily lopper work. The staff always has chainsaws, because they will be needed, but, you know, we don't hand out chainsaws to the. Yeah, all ages are welcome. Definitely get some young people, you know, or expectations of them are often lower, but they're there. I mean, it's not just about clearing, it's about the experience of, you know, sort of working the land and making difference and doing it as a group. Yeah, and here's some pictures that just, when you talk about the Warson path that goes from the parking lot of the old community center down into the park. I mean, it was solid honeysuckle now, and there's still, honeysuckle comes up and we have to pull it every year, but I mean, it's really just a perennial bed with shrubs, you know, that, it's beautiful, and it didn't used to be, so, you know, and that's with the help of weed workers. So I think that is all that I have. Yeah, that's my presentation.
All right, Brian. Thank you very much. All right, well, you know, I'm always very comfortable with a free-flowing coffee with the mayor, and some people ask some questions already. We'll reach out and say, are there any other comments or remarks that you would like? Go ahead.
I have a question. Since honeysuckle has been planted all over Olivet back in, I think, 40s, 50s, 60s, along the wires. I don't know if we want to think about something about removing all the honeysuckle in Olivet, because it's in a right of way for homeowners. And I try to keep it back on my side, but of course it always comes back. And, you know, since there's so much of it, the birds plant new ones everywhere. And I'm always finding them. So I don't know if we need to think about long-term, you know, how can we help neighbors get rid of it? And that might also help in other areas, because the more you get rid of, the less birds will be planting it in new places.
You know, that's food for thought. Everything takes volunteers and manpower.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, but this is, homeowner
yeah,
right of way,
sure.
which is,
The
different.
homeowners right away.
But I
Right,
don't
yeah.
know if, the council wants to kind of do a little bit of,
Well, that'll be,
thinking about
that'll be,
that for the future.
that'll be a conversation for the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that to the attention and perhaps the future council will be considering and having that conversation. Everything does cost time and money, volunteers, their time, the city's money. But thanks for the
Yeah,
food for
no, but I
thought.
mean to encourage homeowners to,
Look, I turn back every year and I will tell you, every year I have a family of 5 deer. I've had my spouse, stop feeding them corn in the back
Oh,
of
my
the
God.
yard. But they do still come every year. I tease my nieces and nephews that we're nurturing the deer for Santa, so be good girls and boys. But I cut it back in my backyard
well, I.
every year,
But
every
on
year.
the other side
Yeah.
of the right of way,
Or the neighbor on the other side that doesn't really care that you're still, you're fighting that battle of you and what you do and what your neighbor does or what your neighbor does not do.
Right.
So great thoughts. In the back, hi.
Hi, what's your personal opinion about the, growing wild yards? I think it's the prairie look. There's, most of our neighbors in our little neighborhood down Dealman, everything is pristine. 3 of us on the cul-de-sac use the same landscaper and we're all out digging weeds. And just a half a block behind me, it's completely run amok
Mhm,
and it's a look,
mhm.
How do you like that, number one? And number two, we also have, our next door neighbor is a tree hugger. And even though there's a evidently dead huge tree, there it stands. They put in a lot of money in a swimming pool, but left a really dead tree. And every time branches fall, sometimes on our driveway, all they do is schlep them to the back of their yard and leave them there like one of those piles you saw. To me, it's totally unsightly.
Mhm.
And whose responsibility is that to cut back branches that are on my property?
it's your.
Judge Judy would probably say,
It's your responsibility.
if I want to cut it, could I?
Yep.
I want to interject, Brian's the city's horticulturalist. We're not code enforcement, so I strongly encourage you to bring that question to the planning department, to
Oh.
Carlos Trejo and his team. Because I know that can be a little political charge conversation, and I want to shield Brian from having to answer that question. Thank you.
Mention that we have someone, Elizabeth Struckhoff, Master Gardener, October 21st. And she's going to talk about planting native gardens that are friendly to your neighbors.
Oh, great. Yes, that's in our activity
And
guide.
it's in the activity guide.
Yeah, I'll grab that.
Yeah, I think I would, if also just if somebody, owns their home, how you do native plants in the front of the house.
Yeah.
It kind of needs to be different than how you do it in the back. of the house. I don't think you can't use them in the front, but I think.
But you might mention to your
But they're
neighbors
diff-
that
you
we
know.
have that program. And then maybe we can bring
That
somebody.
you do
with
need
you.
to think about how your neighbors feel,
Yeah.
just in the most general, that's my general response. Any other,
Any other questions this time? All right, one last thing, I don't mean to put you on the spot. If you want to come up and talk about your involvement Sunday with regards to what is going on at Castor did recognize you and the organization that are volunteers. If you want to come up and speak about it, Kate, come on up. Brian will give up a chair and I can give you a couple minutes.
I'll leave these up here for everybody.
Yeah, so just piggybacking on what Ed spoke about earlier.
Identify yourself, sweetie.
I'm Kate Pishon Hellman, and I run a small citizen group called Olivet Sustainability Advocates here in Olivet. If you're interested in learning more about us, we're easy to find, olivetsustainability.com. So Ed reached out to our group to help with the Cottonwood Trail restoration, path, mulch, wood chip laying. So yeah, so that's happening this Sunday.
Sit down, babe, I'm not seeing you.
This Sunday from 1 to 3 at the Cottonwood Trail. We do actually have enough wheelbarrows now, so don't feel like you have to bring one. We've had quite a few people sign up to bring them. And really, it's any ability. So if you're like, I can't really do much more than spread mulch or weed chips, that's totally fine. You don't have to be the one shoveling or wheelbarrowing. But it's a great opportunity to bring your kids, especially if you haven't been on those forest paths. They're wonderful. And I really think the contributions that Brian, Ed, the whole team have done in our parks, it's just been tremendous over the years to see the transformation. And I know I can look around. I know a lot of you have been involved in that transformation. So it's cool. And if you're interested in learning about other things related to native plants here in Olivet or other items related to sustainability, you can check us out, olivetsustainability.com.
All right, thank you, Kate. All right, and I will give a little warning here to those who are seniors like me with bad knees. If you're gonna go on the Cottonwood Trail and you wanna walk it, I would highly suggest if you're older like me, you deal with the walking sticks. It can be a bit difficult on the old knees and a little bit of good support to help you while you enjoy that internal space with nature. Just an FYI for us old folks. All right. Any last minute questions? All right, appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for letting me put some of you on the spot to come on up here and have the conversation, because this appears to be an important matter and nature restoration for the city. So with that, there's donuts, there's coffee. Thank you much. Have a great rest of your day. We will see you at the Harvest Festival on October 26th. And hopefully see you out this Sunday to continue the cleaning up of the nature trails and invasive plants and all of that. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you.